everyone. My name is Katie, and I'm the founder and president of the Neo Cyber Institute. I'd like to welcome you all to the fifth interview in our Cyber Career Series. Through this series, we want to show students what real life cybersecurity is like and how they can get involved. Today, we're speaking with a cloud security expert at your request. We hope you all enjoy this video, and now I'll hand it off to Madeline to introduce our speaker.
Yeah, so hi everyone, my name is Madeline. I'm the Vice President of Neo Cyber Institute, and today I'm excited to introduce John Martinez. John has over 10 years of experience working in cloud security and is currently the Director of Cloud Research and Development and of Developer Relations at Palo Alto Networks. He's also worked on cloud architecture and security for Adobe and Netflix. And so John, thanks so much for being here again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Katie and Madeline, for having me on, and everybody else.
All right, so our first question, we're going to kind of start all the way at the beginning. What was your first exposure to cybersecurity and what got you into it?
Oh, geez. My first exposure to cybersecurity was way before there even was a term called cybersecurity. So yeah, back in the 1990s, I had a pretty varied career at the time. It was sort of the beginning of my career, or at least the first, I would categorize it as the first third of my career. So I would say that I'm now in my last third of the career. But I actually worked on, my title was Internet Administrator. It was really the early days of enterprise companies having a full-time internet connection. And so it was a very new type of job function to worry about what was happening over that internet connection, and whether inbound or outbound. So I had a job where I was the firewall administrator for an enterprise company, and having now to worry about things like, are we being compromised? Are we getting hacked? So that was my very, very first sort of entry into the cybersecurity world and security in general.
And so another question about your kind of initial exposure, looking back on your experiences now, do you have any advice about the cybersecurity field that you wish you could give your younger self or that you could give to yourself when you first started in the field?
Absolutely. I think it's don't get frustrated when you don't end up doing exactly the thing that you see yourself doing in the future. And I think we all sort of go through that cycle in our careers where it's like, I was speaking to somebody earlier this morning that studied mechanical engineering in college, and well, I'm not doing mechanical engineering. I love computers, the computer aspect of it. So I think in any of the fields that are within the computer science world, it can happen as well. And so, and a lot of us do fall into the cybersecurity world by chance, or we fall into it less about design and more about, it's something that I did. And just to back up a little bit, I do want to say this is that the way that I got into the computer field was actually by way of actually showing the company that I worked at the time. I was in the electrical engineering side of things before I got into computers. And I had actually figured out a way to compromise one of our servers at work. So you could say I hacked into a server, but I did the ethical thing, right? In today's world, we call it ethical computing. We didn't have a term for it back then in the early 90s. So I actually went to the IT manager and I said, hey, I got into the server and I have root on the server. Let's fix this. You should fix this. And the reply back was, would you like a job? And so that's literally how I got in. So I guess even further than actually being an internet firewall administrator, I was actually already sort of in cyber even at that time, early in the career.
That's such a great story. And I love how you're talking about how people kind of fall into the field.
Sure.
I do know a lot of our audience is kind of younger and they're deliberately wanting to enter the cybersecurity
Absolutely.
field.
Absolutely.
So do you have any advice for someone like that who's like right now looking to what they should study or what they should do prior?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And, computer science fundamentals are absolutely, absolutely important, for sure. And definitely learn your programming basics. And just keep an open mind. One of the things that distinguishes us in the cybersecurity field, and I think sort of if you categorize hacking, whether it's ethical or not, and it's an important topic to broach because there are the various stripes of hacking. One of the things that is ingrained into our type of personality is that we like to tinker. So absolutely develop that tinkering aspect in your character, in your career. It'll go a really long way. Don't stop tinkering. Keep doing it. Keep testing. Keep messing with that device, with that operating system. It's an awesome thing to have in your personality. It's an awesome thing to have as part of you going into the cybersecurity field.
Awesome. And so we do have a lot of questions about your work again in cloud security. But
Sure.
before we get into that, can you just briefly clarify, what actually is the cloud? Because a lot of people might have like a
Sure.
general idea, but they might not know specifically what really goes on.
Sure, absolutely. I think boiled down at its most basic level, it's a computer server that you don't run in your own data center, in your own server room, in your own data closet, etc. It's basically a time slice rented compute instance. And further than that, the cloud providers have done a service to the industry where it's now basically you can think of it as a utility, compute as a utility, just like how you turn on your lights at home. Or at the office, you turn it on, you use the lights when you need to, and then you turn it off, and you're no longer paying for the lights, for the power that you're using for the lights. So it's an analogy with the cloud computing world as well, where you use the servers and the capacity and the storage, et cetera, and you pay for what you use and when you use it. And once you turn it off, you no longer have to pay for it anymore. And that's what's turned the industry inside out, really. And I've worked in the previous generation where companies actually had to build big, huge data centers and stuff those data centers full of network equipment, storage equipment, compute servers, et cetera. And it just cost millions and millions of dollars. And now we're shifting that cost out. And what that's done, it's not all about cost. It's also all about enabling new ways of architecting applications. So a lot of what we take for granted today in terms of, if you use TikTok, if you use Instagram, if you use all of those apps that we have on our phone, if it wasn't for the cloud, we wouldn't have those capabilities, the capability to pretty much be anywhere in the world and share with others. And so that's what made me really excited when I first joined Netflix and I learned about the cloud, really learned about what the cloud was and how to work with it.
That's amazing. Actually, one of our questions was what made you choose to specialize in cloud security. So you kind of just
Sure.
answered that one, unless
Yeah,
you want to
yeah.
elaborate more.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, so because it is an important distinction. One of the things that I've had throughout my entire career is that I've always gravitated towards using code as a way of automating the things. And what I mean by that is that I've come into this and I've had this opinion since very early on, even before I was into computers, that it doesn't make sense for me to use computers and the computers basically to run me. Really, I'm the master of the computer, so therefore the computer should do my bidding, right? And so it's kind of that mentality, right? It's and so part of that mentality, what that brings is the desire for me to automate as many of the things as possible. And my mantra has been, if I need to do something more than twice, then I'm going to automate it. So very early on, if there's some Linux tinkers, here is an example, because that's my world. That's my background is Linux and Unix. That means shell scripting. That means Python programming, make the computer do the work for you. And so I've always gravitated towards the automation side of the world. And it just so happened when I began working on cloud projects, it lent itself very naturally to that side of me, to the automation side of me. And so fast forward into the need to actually secure not just the applications that we were running in the cloud, but the actual APIs and the way we interact with the cloud. That's what basically threw me over the edge in terms of deciding to work on cloud security specifically.
Awesome. And actually kind of going off of that again, you might not have anything else to add, but I'll ask this
Sure.
anyway.
Mhm.
How do you feel that your work with cloud security interacts with other areas of security or just
Mhm.
technology in general? I think that kind of goes along with what you're talking about
Yeah.
automation,
Yeah.
but in case there's anything else.
No, absolutely, for sure. Any company of any size today definitely is not just worried about the perimeter that is their firewall and the network that makes up either their local office or their data center. The perimeter in today's age is actually the internet. Which is a very, very large perimeter. So, and specifically on the side of the cloud, it definitely affects security teams that are looking at, well, how do I know what my attack surface is? How do I know what things I need to go protect? So it literally, we have to think in that terms outside of the network boundaries that we've set up, and really talk about identities. Where do my user identities live? These are usernames, passwords. These are API access tokens. And where is the content living? We've all used either Google Drive, we've all used Dropbox or one of those cloud storage solutions. And so how do I, as a company's infosec engineer or person that's worried about whether we've been compromised or not, how do I know that all of those things are secure and I can trust, right? And so that really is where the intersection between cloud security and the rest of security come into play, is really at that touch point. Is the cloud is here, the cloud is being used in your company by your employees, by everybody really in the world. If you have an iPhone or if you have an Android phone, you're using the cloud. That's just the way it is. So how do you protect that?
That's great. So right now, you're working in research and development for
Mhm.
Palo Alto, right? So could you tell us a little more about what you're doing with that?
Absolutely. I liken what we do to being the mad scientist within Palo Alto Networks. And so, it's a very interesting. I super love my job, by the way. I love what I do because it does keep me at a place where we can work on things that aren't being thought about, or things that are being thought about, whether within the company or whether it's by a customer or whether we're looking out in the open source land. So we get to play around all day. So literally, it's the type of job where, again, going back to my comment on tinkering, we get to be the tinkers within Palo Alto Networks, and I absolutely love the job. But it is a discipline, right? So just like with anything, I and my team have to be abreast into what the latest is in terms of not just the new cloud services and technologies that are being developed by the cloud providers, but also what is being used as exploits, as hacks, et cetera. And we have to go by what all of those things are and come up with solutions that may make it into a product. More than likely, they're prototypes of some Frankensteinian solution that we came up with, and but it's code that's sometimes crude, but it works, right? So I absolutely love what we do. It's a very important function.
And so I know this is going a little bit backwards in terms of your career path,
Sure.
but we had a lot of questions about your work with Netflix. So can you again
Sure.
explain what work you did at Netflix and
Absolutely.
how that differed from what you do now?
Absolutely. So at Netflix, I was not a cybersecurity person, kind of going back, right? And so, again, kind of going back to the question you asked me earlier about, well, cybersecurity, how do you get into it, all that stuff, right? So there will be cycles within your career where you might switch, to some other type of role, or you may come from another type of role and get into cybersecurity. So there, I was a systems engineer, and my role there was to help Netflix move applications outside of their data center into the cloud, specifically Amazon Web Services as their cloud provider. And so besides them working on, so the Netflix that we all know and love is the streaming movies and streaming TV shows part of Netflix. So I worked there right around 2010, 2011. And that was I would say the very, very early days of their streaming service, when the content was horrendous. It sometimes worked, it sometimes didn't. Well, most of the time it didn't. But there was a lot that we were learning, and a lot of what was happening was because parts of our applications were already running in the cloud and parts of it were still running in the data center. So there was that challenge to get over during those early days. But my job was to help them move applications outside of the data center. So I not just had to learn about applications and how they operated within the confines of our data centers, but also how we would architect them and remake them so that they'd be able to run in the cloud. Which was an environment at the time where we literally had to treat the cloud as a service that could fail at any time. So we coined a term, excuse me, we coined a term in those times that said we had to architect for failure. And that really was born out of the cloud and its shortcomings back in those days. We learned a lot. There's another term that everybody might also have heard about called chaos engineering. So that's also something that we learned, I would say, very painfully. We learned that lesson inside of Netflix when I worked there. But outside of my job and having learned the cloud, I learned all sorts of really, really cool and interesting things about how the streaming industry works. So things like transcoding of movie files from the studios, and making them available to all of the different devices that they would go in and be viewable in. So lots and lots of storage needed for all of that. And also the transcoding part is one of them, like I mentioned, but also edge networking as well. How do we get those movies as close to the clients as possible? So where are the players? When I worked there, just as a frame of reference, when I worked there, Apple had just recently introduced the Apple TV to the world. Roku was very, very much in the beginning. So these streaming devices that today we take for granted were just getting their start as well. So it was a matter of how do we take the content to the viewer, the consumer, right? So there was a lot I learned. I'm glad I learned, and it's kind of neat to see the development of the streaming world now, where we have things like, I'm sure we all see WandaVision, we all know about, Disney Plus, et cetera, right? So it's kind of neat to see how the evolution of the streaming industry has been, and that I was kind of feel cool, having been part of the beginning of it. So.
That's really neat. I'm sure a large part of that development was probably due to the cloud, right?
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. Like I mentioned earlier, Netflix, et cetera, couldn't exist without the cloud. Absolutely.
How do you think, having watched all of this transition, how do you think that maybe the cloud will continue to change the world in the future? What do you think it might look like?
That's a very insightful question. And I have to admit, I have to take a step back a little bit, Katie, because it's like, being entrenched in something is like, you're kind of looking at it from the inside out, right? I'm in my hole here. How do I see it? But it's a very great question. I think it really is going to continue. There is an industry term that people may or may not have heard of. It's the adoption hype life cycle. And so it's a bell curve. And if you follow the cycle of adoption, and having now gone from the very beginning, where it's sort of the discovery phase and it's the slow ramp up to the adoption phase, I really, in my view, there could be differing opinions, but I don't think we're at the peak of the adoption cycle yet. I think really there's a lot of industries that have traditionally sort of fallen off in terms of adopting cloud. I think mostly in some people here that are interested in cyber might run into some of these business types, like, for example, banks, healthcare. They're sort of the industries that are highly regulated, but are very slow to adopt new technologies. I think there's still a lot of adoption in those types of industries of the cloud, but it's happening. We work with those types of customers all the time. But also, I think it's going to enable much more technologies that are putting the power back into the hands of people. So I'm very excited for augmented reality, VR. We just got our Oculus over Christmas, so I'm very interested in that whole world, because I think those immersive experiences are going to be what drives us into the future. So I could really see a place where we're, instead of watching a movie in front of a big screen TV, we throw on our our VR glasses, and now we're watching a movie in a virtual theater with our friends around the world, right? And why not, right? And I think that's the type of reach and social community that I think we can build with the cloud as we develop it some more.
Yeah, everything about the tech industry is just changing every day. So I'm excited to even see what's new just this next year.
Right, absolutely.
And so we had a few other questions from our students about your time at Netflix. And so one was, did you have a favorite project, or maybe what was your biggest accomplishment at Netflix? You can choose either or, but they were curious about that.
Sure. Yeah. Just I guess I'll put it there's all sorts. I was working on all sorts of fun stuff, but I think one of the I'll put it in terms of what was the most challenging and reward outcome project that I worked on. I actually was part of the team that worked on the ratings database move to the cloud. And, that might seem to be kind of, the boring part of Netflix, that little thumbs up, thumbs down that you get at the end of, when you stream something on Netflix, right? But, just the number of servers, the amount of data that was represented for all of those ratings and the tracking of all of that, it just boggled my mind how big that was even in 2010. Because remember that Netflix wasn't just about streaming, it was also about DVD rentals. And so we inherited all of that data as well. So, they obviously had a pretty large DVD business before they went into streaming. And so just the sheer amount of size and data that I was responsible for helping move out was a big accomplishment. And we did it. We were successful at it. So of course we had to, but yeah, it was good to be part of that project and a whole bunch of other stuff too.
It's amazing to think about how much data is required for even little features like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we have one more question about Netflix that was saying you didn't work there for a very long time,
Sure.
but you've said that it made a big impact on your career.
Absolutely.
So how do you think that kind of happened?
Absolutely. It was my stepping stone into the cloud. Absolutely. And, that's defined the last 11 years of my career. And so to the point where my job after Netflix was one where I had met somebody that I knew from Adobe. So if you look at my LinkedIn, I've worked at Adobe several times, which is another one of the industry luminary type of companies, right? And so I had met somebody at a cloud meetup. Again, cloud is new, right? People are talking about, there's the buzz about the cloud. So I went to a cloud meetup and I saw an old boss of mine from the old Adobe days there, and he said, "Hey, aren't you at Netflix?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm at Netflix." He's like, "How's that going?" I'm like, "It's going great. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of, pressure, and we're rapid, and, we're evolving really quick and very large scale and everything." And he looks at me and he's like, I want to think of this as, we sent you off to a 1-year training program. That's how long I lasted at Netflix. But it was, long story short, that was my stepping stone into getting into the ground floor, really the very beginning of another very large scale project that I was fortunate enough to work on, and that's the Creative Cloud project. So if you're familiar with Adobe apps, I'm talking the creative apps like Photoshop and Illustrator and some of those, right? Photoshop is a verb, right? We all know that, right? I was fortunate to have worked on the Creative Cloud part of that project at the very, very beginning. To the place where I was responsible for opening up all of the AWS accounts for that project. So it was a very fortunate, and it was a stepping stone, right? So from that point on, then my entire career now has been all cloud related.
And so we want to continue the conversation about your time at Adobe briefly. And so we know that you've worked at Adobe twice. So what was different the first and second time around?
Sure. The first time around, it kind of tracks with the industry. So one thing personally about me that I didn't really talk about, besides a tinkerer and an automation nut that I am, I've always tended to be a neophyte when it comes to technology. So I love new technology. That's what I do. So to get to your question specifically, that frames up the answer to the question is that. My previous time at Adobe had been working for their IT department. So I was an interface in that job to our internal engineering teams. And then moving on past my Netflix, when I stepped into Netflix and then came back to Adobe, it went beyond my normal IT type of stuff and into architecting for Adobe's use of the cloud. So it was vastly different, different responsibilities. It pretty much is completely different job. So that's how that went.
Do you think you could tell us a little more about your work as like cloud architecting and anything for students in the
Sure.
audience who might not know quite what that is yet?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like with any architecture job in whether it's software architecture, infrastructure architecture, security architecture, anytime we see the word architecture, what we're really referring to is for somebody's ability or responsibility to design what our systems are going to look like at a large scale, right? So if we take the 40,000-foot view of the solution we're trying to accomplish, the problem we're trying to solve, we look at the entirety of that project holistically from a technology perspective. So you have to be very adept and very aware of not just the technology piece, but also the financial piece. How much is this going to cost? You have to be very aware of and knowledgeable of what's the security piece. How are we going to secure this? So it's basically, as an architect, you're a jack of all trades. Or a Jane of all trades, right? You're looking at this holistically and at a 50,000-foot level before you start defining the components of what solutions are we going to use for this part of the architecture, for that, the compute, what are we going to use for storage? And so cloud architecture, just like any of the other architecture fields that I talked about, is very similar. So I have to look at and understand how the cloud provider works, how security for the cloud provider works, how scalability for the cloud provider looks, and apply that knowledge to coming up with a solution. And for example, specifically, like how did we do it at Adobe? So they presented to us, management presented to us the desire to have instead of having every 18-month development cycles to the creative apps, now we're going to offer these applications as a subscription to our customers with attached cloud storage. There's the business proposition. Okay, so I, as an architect, had to think of, okay, well, what does that look like from a solution? So I would then talk to my counterparts in the software architecture side of the house. Okay, how are we designing the applications to support that business use case? Okay, cool. Now I have to start and think, how am I going to apply this to the cloud? How am I going to lay down what types of services we're going to use from AWS? What type of security we're going to lay down? Another term that I'm going to bring in that is, today it's table stakes and we hear all the time, but how is DevOps going to look like? How are we going to go from software development to deployment in the cloud? So there's a lot of different pieces and moving parts that you have to really take into account and design for. So that's the job of a cloud architect.
Awesome. And so I didn't want to switch gears as abruptly, but we
Sure.
did have a question about your startup. So can you talk a little bit about, at what point in your career did you start that company? And then how did that lead to the next part of your career?
Sure. Yeah. And just to clarify, it wasn't my startup. I was just there very early on. But no, and again, with a lot of on the career guidance side of it, you're going to get opportunities throughout your career where you may make friendships at places you work at. And so this was, for me, one of those situations where the other architects that I worked with at Adobe went and they took the risk to start a cloud security company. And so specifically, it was a problem that we were solving for at Adobe. And they went and looked out to the rest of the industry and they said, hey, of the people and companies that are adopting the cloud, this is a big need. And so they ventured out, they had an idea, they ventured out and raised venture capital to go start up their idea. And so I actually followed them about 6 months later into their venture. And it was a great experience. So there, even though at Adobe, like I mentioned, as part of cloud architecture, you do security. So it wasn't like a thing that it wasn't like a thing that we had specifically a job for a cloud security engineer in those days. I know that today, in fact, where I work at Palo Alto Networks, we definitely do have people that are specialists in cloud security in InfoSec, right, where their job is to monitor and to react to threats in the cloud. But we were doing it. We just didn't call it that in those days. I moved on to the startup. I joined the startup, and interestingly enough, here I am an engineer at this point. I've been an engineer for 18, 19 years or something like that. I joined the company, and I ended up doing sales. So it was one of those jobs at a startup. The difference between a large company and a startup is that at a large company, you usually can go, and they're both great for various parts of your career. At a large company, as just a frame of reference, you can specialize in something and go very deep into that specialty. Now, at a startup, the need is very different because you're trying to develop a product while at the same time you're trying to sell the idea to customers. I mean, that's the whole point, right? Is to take it out and sell your solution. So I gravitated towards in that job towards getting other companies up to speed as to what cloud security is. And so my job was to be out in the field with our sales reps, and before we even had a product, sell the idea. And so I had never been in sales before in my entire career, but I will say that just like it feels great to accomplish something in the technology field, it felt very good to actually be part of that first dollar we earned when we made our first revenue. And so that's where I really developed a lot of my business sort of acumen. You sort of already have a little bit of business acumen, but I really was able to develop it, in the trenches, as it were, out in the field, and getting to know customers. I think more than anything, one of the things is that I myself know, and this is something that as you mature in your career, you'll get to experience, is that you get to know who you are as a person and apply that into your career. And so I got to know that for myself. I'm naturally an extrovert, which is, already kind of a rare trait in engineers, right? But I'm an extrovert. So I really enjoyed being an engineer. I didn't see myself as being in sales. I saw myself as being an engineer that was talking to customers and prospective customers every day, all day, right? So I really enjoyed that part of it. And then I transitioned towards the second half of my time. So we lasted 4 years. And before we were acquired by Palo Alto Networks, by the way, so where I work at today. My second half of my time at the startup, I actually, because of my passion for talking to customers, I ended up leading the customer success team, which customer success as a business function is all about. It's not about selling to customers anymore. It's about actually taking care of the customers. So part of that is a support role. Part of it is a solutions role where hey, customer, let's get you on the product. Let's get you using it. You're not using this part of the product. Why not? Let's figure it out. Oh, you decided to not renew your subscription with us. It hurts, but we want to understand why. Is it a product deficiency thing? So you get to, as an engineer, it was an awesome experience because I got to apply a lot of my engineering mindset to that business role. So again, as a career advice, you might get into that, and apply your skills in the business side of the house. So it happens.
Thank you so much. The time has actually really flown by, so we're pretty
Sure.
close. We have one last question for you. That's, do you have advice for students who are specifically interested in cloud security?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, the big areas to concentrate on when it comes to cloud security and cloud in general, but you can apply those. So, right. So learn the fundamentals of the cloud. There's several cloud providers at this point. They all have sort of the same basic building blocks. They all have compute, they all have storage, they all have network, and then they build on top of those fundamentals. But really, what I would say, concentrate on your scripting and your programming skills. So Python, probably the number one, but there's other languages you can go and learn. If Python is not your thing, Go is just as powerful of a language cloud. So that's one aspect of it. And also specifically for the cloud, for cloud security, really learn how the authentication and policy mechanisms work. And what I'm talking about is, how is it that the APIs are secured? So that's what it really comes down to. Because one of the awesome things about the cloud as infrastructure is that I can treat my infrastructure in code. As opposed to, setting up a physical machine in front of your desk and hook it up to a monitor and et cetera. I can now go create and I can go destroy all of this infrastructure as code. And that's what it really comes down to. It comes down to, and that's why I say the programming fundamental is so important, is because you can exercise those APIs. So really learn about how that interaction with the APIs and the security functions. So some advice, AWS is still, Amazon Web Services is still the biggest cloud. So probably bang for your buck, it's probably the cloud to learn still. So I highly recommend there's actually, and you can go get, Udemy and some of these other online training sites have really good learning courses for learning cloud architecture for AWS. And so there's a fundamental cloud architecture, and that sort of will set the base of, okay, this is how the cloud works. And from there, you can specialize and layer on top of the security component of it.
Well, John, thank you so much for all of
Absolutely.
your responses today. I learned so much during this interview, and I know our students and the rest of our audience definitely will too. And so unless there's anything else so we have to say, I think we will wrap it up here. So to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in again. And yeah, stay tuned for the next episode. And yes, John, thank you. And we'll hope to talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Megan. Bye.